The Empirical Energy Podcast blows open the silent revolution, rewriting the rules of global energy markets. Measured, verified energy is no longer an alternative. It's becoming the gold standard. We dive deep with the producers, traders, consultants, and renegades driving this seismic shift. Step inside the raw mechanics of how verification and blockchain-fueled trading are dismantling the old systems and creating a future where alternative energy doesn't just compete, it takes over. This is the movement of reshaping energy as we know it. Bold, unstoppable, and just getting started. Here is your host, Mark Smith.
Hey everybody, this is Mark Smith, the host of Empirical Energy Podcast, where we bring together energy, blockchain, and AI. And I'm here today with Deb Ryan from Geofinancial. Welcome, Deb.
Hi, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, now Deb's also a podcaster. In fact, she's got her own podcast called Navigating Carbon. What's Navigating Carbon about?
So Navigating Carbon's really around bringing together industry, technology, whether that's physical technology or data and things like that, as well as kind of the nonprofit side of emissions and carbon markets and stuff like that, to really all learn from each other, right? Like, how are we all working together? Where are the challenges, and what's kind of going on as we look to lower emissions, right? We've all got a common goal of like, how do we figure out how to reduce emissions across all of these things? So yeah, people can check it out if they're interested. So yeah. It's good. It's fun.
So you and I met back when you were with S&P. And in fact, one of my clients, Triple Crown, was looking to come up with some empirical measurement. And so we're looking at different things, and they'd try different subjective kind of certifications, but then landed on this methane performance certificate, which was an S&P type product. And anyway, so tell me about your background with S&P and how you got into this whole methane measurement thing.
Yeah, and I come from a slightly different background to some folks in this space because I'm actually a petroleum engineer. I spent the first 15 odd years of my career doing upstream oil and gas, both at operators and in consulting. But my focus throughout my career has really been around cash flow and reserves and financial implications and stuff. And so when I joined S&P Global, I was the head of carbon markets and the emissions analytics team. So, and really on the emissions side, focused on how do we incorporate emissions into the price of commodities? And so methane was one of those key topics and conversations that we were working on with the methane performance certificates of like, how do you price methane into natural gas markets? And that's the evolution of that is now some of the work that I'm doing at Geofinancial on the methane data side of it, as well as, obviously working with you guys at Clean Connect on the idea of, certified natural gas, empirical energy, and really finding these market solutions. Given, like I said, my background in cash flow and financial analytics and things like that, it's for me, companies, countries, individuals, we all make decisions for economic reasons. And so if we can find some of those economic drivers, I think we'll get to some of these solutions much faster. So yeah, that's a little bit about me and stuff like that.
Well, I think it's great because it definitely, the whole methane performance certificate, that the project for us, our MO is sort of like find a process or a framework or whatever to figure out, can we automate it using our AI technology or machine modeling and whatnot? And we got there pretty well. But then, we've since then moved on to other certifications like the ISCC and the ISO 14067 and whatnot. But that work, trying to automate the methane performance got us in the game. And we ended up working with Jana Broderson and then hiring her to, because she's got this chemical engineering, professional engineering background. And she's the one that introduces to mass balance, like the thing you need to do to solve this. For us, we were always marrying our monitoring with our camera technology and then with this measurement technology. But there's one problem we have, okay? And that is people say, hey, I'll go full field on the measurement side, which we call Proof Zero, but I kind of only want to put your super duper deluxe Minerva camera systems on maybe 10, 20% of my highest producing sites, which leaves 80% of my upstream sites not covered at all by a camera. And so, we're facing that dilemma and like, well, how are we going to solve that problem? And then, Mark, Chris, and you both reached out to me and said, well, maybe we have a solution. So tell me about Geofinancial and what Geofinancial does.
Yeah, so I've been working with Mark Chris, the CEO and Geofinancial, for a little while. And so we're looking at and taking some of the publicly available satellite data. The team's been funded initially partly through the National Science Foundation to really look at how do we create algorithms and stuff. We've got a great data science team to take publicly available satellite data and actually attribute methane to individual assets, which is a level of detail that's really important, like you said, in this kind of resolution, as companies are really trying to understand what their footprint looks like. And so the team's been able to start looking at that, which has been great. And I think for us, really understanding the role of satellites has been really important, because for a lot of people that are in the methane detection space, there's different resolutions of different measurement techniques. And I know we'll probably get into some of that in a little bit more detail. But for us, it was really figuring out where do we fit in the methane detection space, and what role can we play with satellites, because they don't always have the highest threshold detection to be able to detect methane. So sometimes on their own, they can be a little bit of a challenge, but they are really good at detecting large unexpected leaks. And like you said, they can fill in the gaps. We have much higher resolution in terms of what we can see with a satellite, just because of, how high above the ground it is versus being, right at that source. So allows us to fill in some of those gaps. And the other piece, and there's still some challenges in this, but it also allows a bit of an independent verification of some of those on the ground measurements. I think one of the things that's still really important for people to understand is that we still calculate emissions. We measure things like methane concentration and stuff like that, but we still do need to do some calculations. And once methane and, all emissions, but we're talking about methane here, once it's outside of a pipe, we have to also account for things like weather and wind and all these other things that we need to also calculate and things like that. So having sort of these multiple data sets as well, so that we can sort of independently verify and, corroborate on the ground measurement data and reporting and all these kinds of stuff, is also another really good use of the satellites as well. So yeah, it's been a really interesting, fun journey as we sort of look at the data set and what it's really capable of doing.
So that's the thing, whenever I used to show charts and show, the different level of resolution, we were always on the bottom looking at, in fact, we just got EPA approval to be component level screening, component level inspection with our OGI camera. Yeah, on the other side was the satellites, and they could cover huge areas. And in fact, we're talking about doing weekly coverage, but of hundreds, thousands of sites, right? And we're doing super detailed component level screening, on a small number, of sites, growing. But so then the question became, okay, how could we marry, since we're now doing full field on component level, like we're looking at meters, sales meters, different meters, running them through our process simulation of ProMax, doing real-time mass balance. So we have all that detail, but as I mentioned, some of the sites aren't covered by our cameras. So how can we cover the other ones that maybe it is an 80-20 thing? So we got 80% of the number of sites. They may not be producing, in fact, in the oil and gas space, what we hear from our clients that sometimes 10 or 20% of their sites are producing 80% of the volume, but they still have all these legacy sites. So we thought, all right, what if we put the best of this world? What could we do to cover that? And that's what we've been exploring. In fact, we're now talking about what that integration would look like together on that type of thing. So for us, we've sort of pioneered this thing called the data fidelity score. And if you have our camera system, you get a higher score. But if you had no camera on it, you get a lower score. So we thought, well, wait, if we can cover with the Geofinancial satellite system, and every single week we're going there, we can now start to say, hey, we can actually reconcile down to the same exact time sequence. And we can either say, hey, we didn't see an event, and this confirms we didn't see an event, or we did see an event, and this confirms that visual verification on that. So yeah, we're excited about it. I understand you guys are, excited too about exploring how these things come together.
Well, and again, we know that the satellite perfect. The technology is getting better and better as, more information is being collected and more companies are looking at methane. But with the satellite stuff, what we've also heard from clients and industry is that you don't want to turn up on a satellite. We see that the satellite threshold detection, particularly for the satellites we're using, they're quite high up in the atmosphere. So they get very good coverage, like you said, in terms of what they can actually see on the ground with like the assets and how much coverage they get, to the point where we can revisit sites potentially, potentially every 5 days. So on a weekly basis, we can actually know that we're going over the same sites, but the threshold detection of the methane plumes themselves isn't as low as what it would be from on the ground monitoring. So by verifying that there are no large leaks from some of these wells, we can be pretty cost effective for some of those lower producing wells, right? Like, again, like I said at the top, like everything for companies is around, how do they make sure they're making economic decisions? And so being able to screen, know that those lower producing wells aren't having leaks coming out of them. And also, you mentioned, because of that time frame, the plume detection of like, okay, if we see in week 1 that there is no plume, and then maybe we do see a plume in week 2, we can verify, that it's only been a couple of days since that's happened, which is also a big challenge for companies in terms of, well, when did the leak start and when did it stop? And so the frequency in terms of the way the satellites are revisiting some of these sites is also really important, with how frequently that's happening on the timing kind of piece. So it's a really interesting kind of concept in terms of like, how do we then marry these two data sets as well, when you're also seeing on the ground, leaks and stuff? And do we see it at the satellite level? And if not, then, we know that it's below that threshold detection and stuff. But that the top down, bottom up resolution is one of the big challenges the industry is facing, as well as we collect all these different data sets. So it's, like you said, we're really excited to combine these two data sets to really look at, how do we get, companies and clients that resolution across all of the sites that they're looking at and wanting to understand. So
I think the other thing that is a super challenge, like one of the clients that when we met them, they were trying to solve this problem, and they had multiple monitoring solutions, multiple measurement solutions, multiple reporting, different verification thing. And the more systems and that they had to integrate, it just got more and more complicated, and they just kind of hit a wall. We came along with this fully integrated solution. They have to think about it. They made one decision and it's all figured out. So in the same way, people are facing the dilemma of saying, okay, well, if I, get a plane to fly over, I got a problem. Like, how do I integrate that data with like what we're doing, the real-time monitoring at the meter level? Now I got a reconciliation issue. I got to get the time sequence figured out. Becomes a data integration thing, where what we're talking about is seamless. Like we start off by creating a digital twin of a site. So you see this virtual thing. So we know exactly where it's located. We know each piece of equipment's already laid out and stuff. And now we can just say, all right, we send Geofinancial the GPS coordinates. Now they can fly that thing, give us the data back, and now we can map it exact time sequence against the meter data that we're already gathering, and provide a seamless view of what that looks like.
And I think it's a really important point, because I think that's one of the big issues in the top down. So, things flying over, whether it's a plane or a satellite or a drone, versus on the ground measurements. And a lot of the on the ground measurements are things like static OGCI cameras and stuff like that. But having that continuous timestamp, like you said, so that we can actually match the time, is really important. It's one of the pieces of that reconciliation that, what we've heard from a lot of different companies is when they've got all these different data sources, and one of them says that there was a leak and then another one doesn't, or they're different and stuff. They've all got different timestamps and stuff like that. Sometimes, we see them, at different times of the day. And so it's like, well, when did it happen? When did it start? What's the actual volume and all this kind of stuff? So the integration with the continuous system to, like you said, to be able to timestamp that is huge. And so, we're really excited to see, how that comes together, and how we can really start to help incorporate some of this top-down information, not just then for leak detection, but like I said, like for verification of what we're seeing on the ground as well. I think is a really important piece in also providing certainty. There's a lot of, as we look to market solutions and with the reporting requirements that are necessary for a lot of companies, the independent verification and audit of emissions is something, particularly as corporate reporting becomes more prevalent, is something we're going to see more and more, and is more and more necessary to have that verification as well. So that's also another big piece that we're excited about with the integration of the data sets.
So you actually sent me this slide kind of saying, okay, well, what would that sort of integration look like? And so kind of walk me through this slide. And,
So like I mentioned, so for GEO on the left, so we're using some of the publicly available satellites, so the European Space Agency and NASA satellites, and it gives us the ability to look 100%, essentially at the whole globe. The caveat being some of the satellite technology right now really only works onshore and in certain latitudes, has some trouble in snow and at higher elevations and things like that, has some trouble over water right now. But we can revisit sites weekly, essentially, because of the different paths of the satellites as they fly over. We've got history going back to 2015, which is amazing. And so as we think about the integration with, again, that on-site monitoring that's targeted and continuous and has very low threshold detection, so it can pick up those very small leaks. It's a really nice kind of complement of like bookending the data sets. We've seen that some of the other top-down solutions that are out there are very targeted in terms of which sites they're potentially looking at, and sometimes similar, but sometimes slightly better threshold detection than we have. But again, don't necessarily have that regularity in terms of how often they're revisiting sites, which can be a challenge, like we talked about with like, if there is something detected, okay, that's one thing, but it's that start-stop time of those plumes that's also really critical for companies with their reporting, and also the verification of like, what's the volume of methane that's actually been released. So yeah, we're really excited to sort of see how these two bookends really work together to help companies really fill in the gaps and understand their whole asset.
So, and I'll walk through on the Clean Connect side, right? So we have these sensors. We're reading the actual meter data right off of SCADA in real time, and we're running it through the ProMax process simulation. So we're getting that real-time mass balance, which gives us that component level, non-fugitive measurement, as well as the mass balance. And then again, if we have our Minerva system on there with our OGI camera continuous, now we're getting the real-time fugitive. But what if we don't have our camera on there? Well, by combining that with the, methane scan from GEO, now we get that at least weekly scan of a site. And now we can marry those two things and do it. And we're talking about doing that just integrated. So we do have, for qualified companies, and there's a qualification process, we're actually offering Prove Zero for free. And we roll this all out, and we would include Geoscan right in there. Now, why in the world would we do that? We're not offering our cameras for free, but at least the continuous measurement. The reason we're doing is that us and our trading partner, Gunvor, pretty darn confident that that there's premiums to be had. And so there's a lot of companies that say, man, I'd love to have my site measured. It would help me with my OGMP and my subpart W reporting. There's other benefits that they can't even imagine, but the clients that have this are able to optimize their production based on empirical data versus trying to use emission factors and, sort of game the system and all that. So having empirical data and that real-time mass balance really points out certain things. And then again, we automatically bookend leaks that are found with the satellite. We're talking about bookending those things. So there's a lot of things that we can do when we just marry these two things. So yeah, we're excited about this combination. Again, we see it just as, again, they're a high producing site. They put our OGI camera, and all the legacy sites we've got it covered, with the satellite. So kind of the best of both worlds.
Yeah. And like you said, some of those market solutions are something that, I'm really excited to see develop. We've been talking about certified natural gas, empirical energy, and all these kinds of things for a little while, actually. We've had, like you said, you and I first started talking about this a number of years ago. And the idea of, will someone pay a premium for low methane natural gas is a question that the market and the trading community and companies, particularly upstream oil and gas companies, have been trying to answer for a little while. And I think, by having this verification, by having the actual data and the mass balances, as well as then the independent verification from the satellites, I think really starts to build a data set that people trust. It's not just, take my word for it, or, we followed a process, but now we can actually also validate through all the data that, yes, we can show what that means and some of that kind of stuff. And I think as we see, things like the European LNG, regular fossil fuel imports into the EU, maybe it's not, sometimes in some instances, maybe it's not a premium, but maybe there'll be a penalty associated if you can't verify that you've got low methane. In some circumstances, for things like methanol and data centers and stuff, where there are clean fuel directives and other things where, being able to show your whole supply chain, including your upstream production, has low methane, there's value in that. And I think I'm really excited to see how that market evolves. And I know you guys did a podcast with Gunvor last week as well, or last month, I should say, which sort of talked about some of those pieces as well. And I genuinely, believe that when there is market opportunities, people will behave in a certain way. It means that they can justify spending the money to do the verification and the measurement, and allows for us to, again, all work towards a common goal, which shouldn't be about getting rid of oil and gas. It shouldn't be about, not having the energy we need. It should be about reducing emissions. And if we can all kind of figure out how we do that and work to that central goal, then some of that will move much faster, essentially. So,
and the good thing is that the energy traders are now trading with all their alternative energy deals, this EAC, which is either called Energy Attribute Certificate or the Environmental Attribute Certificate. It's like the birth certificate that goes along with the energy. It's now required. And inside of that, when an auditor looks at it, they click on it and they see a GHG report, and they would actually see all the information about where that was created, the provenance of it, the CI score, the carbon intensity score, where this thing was done, and be able to actually look at. So in the case of our camera, they'd be able to go look and see, yeah, we did the scan. Here's what the OGI camera reported for this MMBTU. Similarly, if they didn't have our camera, they'd be able to click on it, and literally an auditor would be able to see, hey, this the scan was done. Here's a picture of your site. We didn't see a leak when the satellite went by, or we did see a leak, and it was confirmed by our mass balance data. So it's very powerful for the auditors, also the buyers down the road. I mean, this energy certificate lives forever. It travels along with this energy, and it goes along and it tells you a ton of data about it. And as Deb mentioned, we did this episode with Gunvor, and in there we actually broke down a transaction where we're doing feedstock blending, between empirical natural gas, empirical RNG, to create empirical net zero gas that was desired by the AI data centers, which everybody wants to serve. And those guys have sustainability goals, net zero goals that they're trying to hit, regardless of what's going on in the world. They still want to hit those goals. And the less stuff they have to offset with carbon credits, they can use insets that we're talking about here. So I see more and more people requiring EACs, and that's exactly what we're doing, this empirical data that you can trade. It's a tradable asset, and I even liken it to, maybe 100 years ago, people were buying surface rights, and then someone figured out, hey, let's separate the mineral rights. Well, mineral rights are traded all day long. They get traded all. You may not even own the surface rights or the mineral rights, and somebody sold a farm 100 years ago or 50 years ago, and they kept the mineral rights, and they're getting the royalties, right? Well, in the same way, EACs are literally created right out, separate from the physical energy, and are traded at a premium. So we're excited to be part of that, and we're excited to work together on that. So anyway, I'll give you the last word.
No, it's great. And it's been, like I said, I've been working in this space on some of these market solutions for a little while. And so it's exciting to see the evolution of it and where we're heading with it. And again, as Geo, we're really excited to see where we fit in and how we partner and play. So yeah, thanks for having me, Mark.
Yep. Thanks.
The Empirical Energy Podcast requires more than a conversation. It takes action. research, and collective wisdom. If today's episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear your insights. Join the conversation and help us shape the future together. We'll be back with more stories, strategies, and real-world solutions that are making a difference for everyone. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe, rate, write a review, and share it with someone you think would benefit from it too. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.